He is 15 years old. He is standing in a river, submerged to his chin, a wooden collar locked around his neck and wrists, a slave cangue, designed so you cannot lie down, cannot feed yourself, cannot sleep without pain. His captors are searching the riverbank. He doesn't move. He waits in that water for hours. When the riders finally pass, he climbs out. Alone. No clan, no father, no army, no title. Nearly 30 years later, he will stand at the head of the largest army ever assembled on the Asian steppe and declare himself ruler of the world. This is not a story about a warlord. This is a story about what a broken man builds when he finally gets power. The Mongolian steppe in the 12th century was not a civilization. It was a wound.
Dozens of tribes occupied the same grasslands, competing for the same horses, the same pastures, the same women. There were no cities, no roads, no written language. The strongest clan raided the next one. The next one raided back. Alliances lasted a season. Blood feuds lasted generations. This was the world Temujin was born into around 1162. His father, Yesujay, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan. Not powerful, but capable. He had enough standing to arrange a betrothal for his young son to a girl named Berta from a neighboring tribe. A political alliance. A future. On his return from arranging that betrothal, Yesujay accepted food and drink from a group of Tatar strangers. He died 3 days later. Temujin was 9 years old.
Within weeks, the Borjigin clan abandoned the widow and her children. They took the horses, the livestock, the supplies. They left a mother and 6 children on the open steppe in winter to starve or survive as they could. They survived. Barely. On roots, on berries, on whatever could be caught. The boy who would conquer the world spent his early teenage years eating rats. Around 1177, the rival Taichut clan, who had abandoned his family, decided the young Temujin was becoming a threat. They captured him. They fitted him with a cangue, a heavy wooden yoke locked around the neck and wrists. It kept your arms out and up. You couldn't lie flat. You couldn't eat without help. You couldn't sleep without pain. It was designed not to restrain the body, but to break the will. He wore it for a time. And then, one night, during a gathering of the Taichut, guards distracted, camp loud with noise, he ran. He ran to the Onan River. He submerged himself in the shallows, wooden collar and all, hidden among the reeds. The search parties came. He heard the horses on the bank. He did not move. A Taichut tribesman found him. He saw the boy in the water. He looked at him. And he walked away, said nothing. We don't know why. Some sense of mercy, some calculation. The man who helped a slave escape is a footnote in history. The slave became Genghis Khan. What did those months of slavery do to Temujin? Here is what we know. The man who later built the Mongol Empire made loyalty, not lineage, the only measure of worth. He abolished the slavery of Mongols by Mongols. He created a law code
that protected the powerless from the clan structure that had abandoned his mother and enslaved him. These were not ideological positions. They were revenge, served very slowly, at civilizational scale. After his escape, Temujin began to build. Not an army, not yet. He began to build relationships. He found Toghrul, the powerful leader of the Karaite tribe, a man who had once been an ally of his dead father. He presented him with a black sable fur coat, a gift, an act of submission that was also an act of strategy. He reconnected with Jamuga, his childhood Anda, his sworn blood brother. The two men were devoted to each other. They slept under the same blanket. They exchanged gifts. For a time, they rode together as one force.
And then Temujin married Berthe, the girl his father had promised him, the alliance he had been riding towards since childhood. It lasted 3 months before the Merkits came. The Merkits had never forgiven Yesugei, Temujin's father, for stealing his own wife from one of their men decades earlier. They arrived at night. They took Berthe. She was held captive for approximately 8 months. When Temujin got her back, with the combined force of Toghrul and Jamuga, she was pregnant. The child, a son named Jochi, was born shortly after her rescue. His paternity was never confirmed. Temujin acknowledged him as his son, but the shadow followed Jochi his entire life and would haunt the succession of the empire. What did this teach Temujin? That alliances were the only thing that stood between a man and catastrophe. And that alliances, like everything else on the steppe, were temporary until they were made permanent by force. He turned his attention to Jamuja. Jamuja was everything Temujin was: brilliant, ruthless, charismatic, with one fatal difference. Jamuja believed in birth. He thought leadership belonged to those born into the noble families of the steppe. He was noble born. Temujin was not. When warriors began choosing Temujin over Jamuja, not because of lineage, but because of how he treated them, the blood brotherhood cracked. The rivalry turned to war. Around 1187, Jamuja won. Temujin was badly defeated. He may have spent the next several years in the service of the Jurchen Jin dynasty, essentially a vassal, rebuilding from scratch, learning the military structures of a settled civilization that had no idea what it was looking at. When he re-emerged in 1196, he moved fast. He defeated the Tatars, the tribe that had poisoned his father, and executed every man taller than the height of a cart axle. Children were spared. Women were absorbed. The tribe ceased to exist as a tribe. He defeated Toghrul, his own patron, the man he had called father, when Toghrul turned against him in 1203. He annihilated the Naiman tribe in 1204, the last independent power on the Mongolian steppe. And then there was only Jamuga. His old blood brother was brought to him in chains, betrayed by his own followers. Genghis Khan offered him a place at his side. The past forgotten, the empire shared. Jamuga refused. He asked for a noble death, no blood spilled. Genghis Khan obliged. His blood brother was strangled. At a great assembly on the banks of the Onan River in 1206, the tribes of Mongolia came together for the first time in their history, and they gave one man a title: Genghis Khan. The meaning is still debated. Universal ruler, fierce lord, oceanic king. No one
agrees. What is not debated, what happened next? Most people think the Mongols won because they were savage. This is wrong. They won because Genghis Khan built a system unlike anything the medieval world had seen. The Mongol army was organized on a decimal system: 10 soldiers, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Every man knew exactly where he stood. Commanders were appointed by competence and loyalty, not birth. A herdsman who performed could command 1,000 men. A noble's son who failed could be demoted to 10. For the medieval world, this was revolutionary. Every other army on Earth ran on aristocratic hierarchy. The Mongols ran on meritocracy. It created a structure where the best soldiers rose and the structure adapted around them.
He gave them a law code, the Yasa. It established sweeping religious tolerance across the empire. It banned the enslavement of Mongols by Mongols. It made theft punishable by death, and loyalty the supreme civic virtue. For a people who had lived by tribal vendetta for generations, this was a legal revolution. Speed. Every Mongol soldier rode with 3 to 5 horses. They rotated mounts constantly. A Mongol column could cover up to 100 miles in a single day, appearing where no army was expected to appear, then vanishing back into the steppe before any defense could be organized. Enemies planned for armies that moved like armies. The Mongols moved like weather. And then there was the psychological warfare. When a city was destroyed, survivors were deliberately allowed to escape. They fled to the next city, and they told the stories. The Mongols lit extra campfires before battle to appear larger than they were. They sent spies into cities months before arrival, merchants, travelers, who mapped defenses and sowed internal divisions. Before the invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire, Mongol agents sent forged letters to the Shah, claiming his own mother had defected to the Mongols, inflaming existing tensions, preventing unified command. The cities that surrendered were administered and taxed, usually with existing leadership kept in place. The cities that resisted were obliterated. Not out of rage, out of policy. Every destroyed city was a message to the next one, and the message worked. Entire regions surrendered without a fight, not because they were cowards, but because they had done the arithmetic. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarazmian Empire. Hundreds of merchants and envoys. A gesture of commerce, possibly also intelligence gathering, but an olive branch by any measure. The governor of Otrar had them all executed. He called them spies. The Shah Mohammed II, ruler of one of the largest empires in the Islamic world, covering modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, endorsed the decision. When Genghis Khan sent a formal diplomatic mission to demand justice, the Shah had the lead ambassador beheaded. He sent the others back with their heads shaved. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Genghis Khan went alone to a mountain. He was there for 3 days. When he came down, he gave the order. Between 1219 and 1221, the Khwarazmian Empire ceased to exist. Bukhara, one of the great cities of the Islamic world, home to hundreds of thousands, its library among the finest on earth, was burned. Samarkand, one of the most populous and beautiful cities on earth, fell in days. The Shah fled west, chased by Subutai and Jebe across 1,000 miles. He ended his days as a fugitive on a tiny island in the Caspian Sea, alone in borrowed clothes with nothing. His son, Jalal ad-Din, fought on. When he was finally cornered at the Indus River, surrounded and outnumbered,
he plunged his horse into the river and swam across.
Genghis Khan watched from the bank. Then he called off the pursuit. He reportedly said that a father would want such a son. The Khwarazmian Empire had taken generations to build. It was gone in less than 2 years. Here is the thing the history books don't resolve neatly. Estimates suggest the Mongol conquests killed up to 40 million people, as much as 10% of the world's population at the time. Parts of Persia and Central Asia didn't recover for centuries. The Islamic Golden Age, the greatest center of science, mathematics, and philosophy in the medieval world, would ultimately be ended by Mongol armies under his successors. And the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, created the most connected trade network in human history up to that point. For 100 years, a single merchant could travel safely from China to the Black Sea under one legal system. Information moved faster than it ever had. Technologies and ideas that had existed only in China, including gunpowder, flowed west along Mongol roads for the first time. The same roads, incidentally, that eventually carried the Black Death to Europe.
The same force that destroyed the Islamic Golden Age created the conditions that made the European Renaissance possible. No one planned this. No one intended it. But the roads were the roads. Here is what the standard account gets wrong about Genghis Khan. It calls him a barbarian. It measures him by the death toll. It treats the savagery as the story. The savagery was the marketing. What Genghis Khan actually built was a system. A military system based on speed and information. A legal system based on merit and loyalty. A trade system based on safe passage and enforced contracts. None of these required savagery. The destruction was the message. The message said, if you submit, you live. If you resist, this is what happens. And because the message was credible, because everyone had heard what happened to Bukhara, what happened to Samarkand, most cities chose to submit. The system worked because the violence was real. But the violence was always in service of the system. Think about where this system came from. A boy whose clan abandoned him, whose father was poisoned, who was enslaved and collared and forced to hide in a river, who watched alliances fail and blood ties mean nothing. He built an empire where loyalty was the only currency that mattered, where a man's birth meant nothing and his performance meant everything, where no Mongol could be enslaved by another Mongol. These were not abstract values. They were answers to specific injustices, delivered at civilizational scale. He died in August 1227. The cause is still unknown. A fall from his horse, the plague, an arrow, an assassination? No one knows.
His body was carried back to Mongolia in secret. Anyone who witnessed the procession was killed. The slaves who dug the grave were killed. The soldiers who guarded them were killed. Horses were ridden across the ground until no trace remained. The greatest conqueror in history does not have a grave you can visit. There is no monument, no tomb, no marker. Just the steppe. He spent his entire life making sure the world knew his name. And his last act was to make sure the world could never find him. Is Genghis Khan. If you want to see what his generals did with what he built, the army that nearly ended Europe, destroyed in 2 days what should have taken 2 years, that video is already on the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.